Dad, what if you missed the right person because you were too busy being strong? The question didn't come from an adult, or a therapist, or even a late-night thought. It came from a 6-year-old girl standing barefoot on a cold kitchen floor at 7:12 in the morning, holding a spoon too big for her hand, while her cereal slowly went soggy. Ethan Cole froze mid-pour, milk spilling slightly over the edge of the bowl before he caught himself, his eyes dropping to his daughter Lily like she had just said something she wasn't supposed to understand yet, something too heavy for someone who still slept with a nightlight shaped like a moon. Outside their small house in a quiet Ohio suburb, the early fall air was crisp, the kind that made your breath visible if you stepped out too soon, and Ethan had already been up for an hour, packing lunches, checking emails from his construction supervisor, and mentally calculating how to stretch his paycheck until next Friday. Life had become a series of routines since his wife passed 3 years ago, routines that kept things moving, kept things stable, kept him from thinking too much. He set the milk down, wiped his hand on a dish towel, and forced a small smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. "Where did that come from, kiddo?" he asked, trying to sound light, but Lily didn't smile back. She just looked at him, serious in a way that didn't belong to a child, her messy blonde hair falling into her face as she tilted her head. "You always say you're fine," she said quietly, stirring her cereal without eating it. "But you don't laugh like you used to." The words landed heavier than any long workday ever had, and for a second, Ethan didn't know what to say, because she wasn't wrong. He hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Not since before hospital rooms and quiet goodbyes, and learning how to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at 2 in the morning. A car honked outside, snapping him back, and he glanced at the clock, realizing they were already running late for school drop-off. "All right, shoes on, we gotta go," he said, clapping his hands once, shifting back into motion because motion was easier than feeling. Lily slid off her chair slowly, still watching him, like she was trying to solve something he hadn't even admitted was broken. Minutes later, they were in his aging pickup truck, the heater taking too long to warm up as he pulled onto the road, the radio murmuring softly in the background. The drive to Maple Ridge Elementary was only 10 minutes, but it was the only time of day that felt quiet enough for thoughts to slip in, and today, they came whether he wanted them or not. At a red light, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, tired eyes, unshaven jaw, a man who had learned how to keep going but maybe not how to live again. From the back seat, Lily suddenly leaned forward between the seats, her small voice breaking through the hum of the engine. "Dad, if you met someone nice, would you tell me?" Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the light turning green as cars behind him started to move, and he hesitated just a fraction too long before pressing the gas. "Why are you asking that?" he said, his tone softer now, cautious, like stepping onto thin ice. Lily shrugged, sitting back, but not letting it go. "Because I think you should," she said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Ethan didn't answer right away, his mind drifting somewhere he had spent years avoiding, somewhere that felt like both hope and betrayal at the same time. As the school came into view, kids and parents filling the sidewalk, he pulled over and put the truck in park, turning slightly to look at her. "Let's just focus on today, okay?" he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, but Lily didn't nod right away. She looked past him, out the window, her expression suddenly shifting into something curious, something alert, as if she had just spotted something important. And then, without warning, she straightened up, her eyes fixed on someone across the street, and her small hand slowly lifted, pointing. The moment Lily's finger lifted, Ethan followed her gaze without thinking, his body reacting before his mind could catch up, and across the street, just beyond the line of parked cars and hurried parents, stood a woman he had never seen before, or at least, that's what he told himself in that first second, because something about her felt strangely familiar in a way he couldn't place, like a memory just out of reach. She was kneeling down, helping a little boy zip up his jacket, her movements calm and patient despite the chaos of the morning rush, her light brown hair pulled back loosely, a few strands slipping free as she smiled at something the boy said. And there was something about that smile, unforced, warm, real, that made Ethan's chest tighten before he even understood why. "Dad," Lily whispered, still pointing, her voice suddenly filled with certainty, her. Ethan blinked, thrown off balance by the simplicity of it, by how quickly she had decided something he hadn't even allowed himself to consider. Her what? He asked, though he already knew what Lily meant. Because children didn't complicate things the way adults did. They just saw what they felt and said it out loud. Lily turned to him, her small face completely serious again. Her, she repeated, as if that answered everything, as if the rest should be obvious. A car behind them honked, sharper this time, pulling Ethan out of the moment, and he realized he had been sitting there too long, engine idling, caught between moving forward and staying frozen in place. Okay. All right. Let's go, he said quickly, trying to shake off the strange pull in his chest as he put the truck fully in park and unbuckled his seatbelt. He stepped out into the cool air, walking around to Lily's side. But as he opened her door, he found her still looking across the street, her attention locked on that woman like she had just found something important and didn't want to lose sight of it. Lily, he said gently, helping her down. Eyes on me. Kiddo, we're gonna be late. But even as he spoke, he glanced up again, almost against his will, and this time, the woman stood up, brushing her hands against her jeans, her eyes lifting, and for a brief second, they met his. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't slow motion, but it was enough for something quiet and unexpected to pass between two strangers who had no reason to notice each other, and Ethan felt it before he could stop himself, that small, unsettling shift that came from being seen when you weren't ready. He looked away first, instinctively, like he had done something wrong, like simply holding eye contact for a second too long had crossed a line he didn't understand anymore. Come on, he muttered, guiding Lily toward the school entrance, blending into the stream of parents and kids, but Lily twisted her body slightly as they walked, still trying to look back over her shoulder. Dad, don't forget, she said, her voice urgent now, like this was something important he might accidentally ignore. I'm not forgetting anything, he replied, a little too quickly, though he wasn't even sure what exactly he was supposed to remember. Inside the school hallway, the noise swallowed them, lockers slamming, kids laughing, teachers calling out reminders, but Ethan felt oddly disconnected from it, like his mind had stayed outside on the sidewalk. He crouched down to Lily's level, adjusting her backpack straps, buying himself a moment to steady his thoughts. All right, he said, softer now. You have spelling today, right? Lily nodded, but her eyes searched his face, like she was checking if he had really heard her earlier. And art, she added, then hesitated, her small hand reaching out to touch his sleeve. Dad, you looked at her. Ethan exhaled slowly, a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I look at a lot of people, Lily, he said, attempting a smile, but it came out thinner than he intended. She didn't smile back. Not like that, she said quietly. Before he could respond, a teacher called Lily's name from down the hall, waving her over, and the moment broke, just like that, ordinary life stepping in where something else had almost started. Lily turned, taking a few steps away, then stopped suddenly, spinning back around and running toward him again, throwing her arms around his waist in a quick, tight hug that caught him off guard. Don't be scared, okay? She whispered against his jacket before pulling away just as quickly and hurrying down the hall without waiting for his answer. Ethan stood there for a second longer than he should have, watching her disappear into the classroom, her words settling into him in a way that felt heavier than they should have coming from someone so small. Then, as the hallway emptied and the morning rush faded, he turned slowly toward the exit, his steps slower now, his mind already drifting back to the sidewalk, to that brief moment, to a woman he didn't know, and to the unsettling feeling that maybe, somehow, this day wasn't going to go the way he had planned it all. By the time Ethan stepped back out into the parking lot, the morning rush had thinned into scattered movement, a few late parents hurrying their kids along, and a crossing guard folding up her sign near the curb, but his pace slowed instead of quickened, his eyes instinctively scanning across the street like he wasn't entirely in control of what he was looking for. And there she was again, now standing beside a dark blue SUV with the same little boy from earlier, crouched low as she fixed the strap on his backpack with careful fingers, her focus entirely on him. And for a moment, Ethan just stood there, keys in hand, watching something simple that somehow felt heavier than it should have. The boy said something that made her laugh softly, and this time, Ethan noticed the way she tilted her head when she listened, like she was fully present, like nothing else mattered in that exact moment, and it hit him unexpectedly. That quiet kind of attention he hadn't allowed himself to give or receive in years. A sudden slam of a car door nearby snapped him out of it, and he shifted his weight, almost turning away, but before he could, the woman straightened up again, and just like before, her eyes found his. Only this time, she didn't look away right away. There was a brief pause, a silent acknowledgement, not awkward but not entirely comfortable either, like two people recognizing something without knowing what it meant yet. Ethan gave a small, reflexive nod, the kind you give a stranger when you accidentally cross paths twice, but she surprised him by offering a faint smile in return, polite but warm enough to feel real, and for a second, he considered walking over, just saying something simple like, "Morning," or asking if the kid was in Lily's class, something normal, something harmless, but his feet didn't move. Instead, he glanced down at his watch, using it as an excuse, even though he already knew he wasn't late yet, and by the time he looked up again, she had opened the car door, helping the boy inside before walking around to the driver's seat, the moment passing before he had the chance to decide anything. Ethan exhaled quietly, rubbing the back of his neck as he finally headed toward his truck, the gravel crunching under his boots louder than usual, like the world was trying to remind him to keep moving. He climbed in, started the engine, but didn't pull out right away, his hands resting on the steering wheel as he stared out through the windshield at nothing in particular, his mind replaying something that hadn't even really happened. Just a look, a smile, a moment too small to matter, and yet it did. His phone buzzed suddenly on the passenger seat, breaking the stillness, and he picked it up to see a text from his supervisor reminding him about a supply delivery he needed to handle before noon. The kind of responsibility that had defined his life lately, concrete tasks, measurable outcomes, things that didn't involve risk or emotion. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath, tossing the phone back down as he finally put the truck in gear and pulled out of the lot, merging into traffic like he had done every weekday for years. The road stretched ahead, familiar and predictable, but his thoughts weren't, drifting back to Lily's words that morning, to the way she had pointed so confidently, like she had seen something he hadn't allowed himself to see. At the next stoplight, he caught himself glancing into the side mirror, half expecting to see that same blue SUV behind him, but it wasn't there, and for some reason, that left a small, unexplainable emptiness that lingered longer than it should have. He shook his head slightly, tightening his grip on the wheel as if that could ground him. "It was nothing," he said out loud, the words sounding less convincing once they left his mouth, because if it really was nothing, he wouldn't still be thinking about it. A horn blared behind him as the light turned green, and he pressed the gas, forcing himself forward again, back into the rhythm of work and responsibility. But even as the construction site came into view, with its noise and movement and familiar chaos, a part of him stayed somewhere else entirely, caught between a child's simple certainty and a moment he hadn't been ready for, and as he parked and stepped out, pulling his jacket tighter against the wind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not because something dramatic had happened, but because something small had, and sometimes, those were the things that changed everything. The first thing Ethan noticed when he stepped onto the job site that morning wasn't the noise or the cold, or even the unfinished framing rising against the gray sky. It was how distracted he felt, like his body had shown up, but his mind hadn't quite followed, and that wasn't something he could afford. Not here, not when one wrong measurement or missed signal could turn into a real problem. "Cole, you with us, or what?" His supervisor, Mark, called out from across the site, waving a clipboard in the air, and Ethan snapped back, lifting a hand in acknowledgement as he crossed the gravel quickly, forcing himself into the rhythm he knew so well. Check the delivery, confirm the counts, sign off, keep things moving. But even as he spoke, nodded, and worked, something underneath it all felt slightly off, like a quiet hum he couldn't shut off. Around mid-morning, a truck pulled in earlier than expected, throwing off the schedule, and Ethan had to step in to reorganize the crew, redirecting materials and adjusting the flow, an external problem that should have pulled all his focus. And for a while, it did, his voice steady, his decisions quick, the version of himself he trusted most, the one who handled things. But then, in the middle of it, as he bent down to inspect a stack of lumber, his phone buzzed again in his pocket, and normally, He would have ignored it, but something made him check. It was a message from an unknown number, just a short line. Hi. This might be random, but is your daughter Lily in Mrs. Carter's class? Ethan frowned, straightening up slightly as he read it again. His first instinct cautious, protective, but then a second message followed almost immediately. This is Claire. We saw each other this morning. For a moment, everything around him blurred into background noise. The hum of machinery, the echo of voices, because suddenly, that small, almost forgotten moment from the school parking lot wasn't so distant anymore. He stared at the screen longer than he should have, his thumb hovering but not moving, because replying felt like stepping into something he hadn't prepared for, something that could shift things in ways he wasn't ready to manage. You gonna sign that or frame it? Mark's voice cut in again, half joking but impatient, and Ethan quickly locked his phone, slipping it back into his pocket as he grabbed the clipboard, finishing what he needed to do. But now the distraction wasn't subtle anymore. It was direct, sitting right there, waiting for him. The rest of the morning moved faster than expected, tasks stacking up, decisions piling on. But every time he had a second, even just standing still for a breath, his mind circled back to that message, to the fact that she had reached out first, that she had noticed him too, enough to ask about Lily, and that realization carried a weight he didn't know how to process. Around noon, as the crew broke for lunch, Ethan finally stepped away, walking toward the edge of the site where it was quieter, pulling out his phone again like it had been calling him all morning. He read the message one more time, then finally typed back, keeping it simple, safe. Yeah, she is. Ethan. He stared at it for a second, then hit send before he could overthink it. The reply came faster than he expected. I thought so. My nephew, Jake, just transferred into her class. He's the one I was with. Ethan exhaled slowly, something about that explanation grounding the situation, making it feel more real, less like a random coincidence. Got it. He seemed like a good kid. He typed, then paused, debating whether to leave it there, but before he could decide, another message came through. It's been a rough move for him. So thank you for not looking annoyed this morning when he was holding things up. Ethan let out a quiet breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, a small, unexpected smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, because he hadn't even thought about that moment from her perspective, hadn't realized she might have been watching him too, interpreting his actions in ways he hadn't intended. No problem. Mornings are chaos for everyone, he replied, and this time, the words felt easier, more natural, like a door had opened just enough to let something through. He slipped his phone back into his pocket again, but the feeling didn't go with it, because now the moment wasn't just something that had happened. It was something continuing, something moving forward in a way he hadn't planned. And as he stood there, looking out over the site, the noise returning, the responsibilities still waiting, he realized something quietly but clearly. This wasn't about a stranger anymore, and whatever this was becoming, it had already started before he had a chance to stop it. By the time Ethan picked Lily up that afternoon, the sky had shifted into that soft gray blue that made everything feel quieter than it actually was, and the school parking lot buzzed with its usual end-of-day chaos. Car doors slamming, kids shouting, parents checking watches. But his attention moved through it differently now. More alert, more aware, like he was looking for something without fully admitting it to himself. And he hated that feeling because it meant he wasn't as in control as he liked to believe. Lily came running out of the building with her backpack bouncing behind her, her face lighting up the second she spotted his truck, and that part, her running to him, smiling like he was still her whole world, was the one thing that never felt complicated. He stepped out, crouching slightly as she reached him, catching her in a quick hug before taking her bag. How was school? He asked, his voice steady, familiar. Good, she said quickly, but her eyes were already scanning past him, searching, and he noticed it immediately. What are you looking for? He asked, though he had a feeling he already knew. Lily pointed again, just like that morning, her small arm extending without hesitation. Her, she said, like it was obvious, like nothing had changed. Ethan followed her gaze, and there she was again, standing near the sidewalk, talking to the same boy, Jake, who was animatedly explaining something with his hands, while she listened with that same patient focus, and this time, Ethan didn't look away right away. Something about the repetition of it, the fact that she was here again, in the same space as them, made it harder to dismiss as coincidence. "Dad," Lily said softly, tugging his sleeve now. "You didn't forget, right?" Ethan exhaled slowly, shifting his weight as he glanced down at her, then back up again, caught between what felt simple to her and what felt complicated to him. "Lily," he started, but the words didn't come easily, because how do you explain hesitation to someone who doesn't understand fear the same way? Before he could find anything to say, Jake suddenly broke into a run toward the parking lot, chasing after a loose paper that had slipped from his backpack, and without thinking, Claire moved quickly after him, her voice calling out his name, the moment breaking into motion. The paper skidded across the pavement, caught by a light breeze, and Jake darted right toward the line of slowly moving cars, not noticing the danger, and Ethan reacted before anyone else, stepping forward fast, reaching out and grabbing the back of the boy's jacket just in time to stop him from moving further into the lane. Everything seemed to pause for a split second, the cars slowing, Claire rushing over, her breath slightly uneven as she reached them. "Jake! Hey! Are you okay?" she said quickly, dropping down to his level, her hands checking him over even though he was already nodding, a little startled but unharmed. Ethan released his grip gently, stepping back half a pace, his heart beating harder than he expected for something that had lasted only seconds. "You gotta watch where you're going, buddy," he said, keeping his tone calm, steady, the way he always spoke to Lily when she got too close to the street. Jake nodded again, clutching the paper now, his energy dropping into quiet embarrassment. Claire looked up then, her eyes finding Ethan's, and this time, there was no distance in it, no passing politeness, just something direct, something real. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now, but carrying weight, the kind that came from knowing how close something had been. Ethan gave a small nod. "He's fast," he replied, a faint attempt to ease the tension, but his voice wasn't as detached as before. Claire let out a small breath, almost a laugh, though it didn't fully reach her eyes. "Too fast sometimes," she admitted, brushing a hand lightly over Jake's hair before standing up again. And there was a pause then, one that felt longer than it actually was, like both of them were aware that this wasn't just a passing interaction anymore. Behind Ethan, Lily stepped closer, peeking out from his side, her expression unusually serious as she looked between them, like she was watching something important unfold. "Dad?" she said quietly, but clearly enough for Claire to hear. "That's her." The words landed in the space between them, simple and unfiltered, and for the first time, Ethan felt something shift that he couldn't ignore, not because of what Lily said, but because of the way Claire looked at him after, not confused, not uncomfortable, but curious, like she was trying to understand what. That meant just as much as he was. For a moment after Lily's words, no one moved, not because it was dramatic, but because it was too honest, too direct in a way that adults weren't used to handling in public spaces, and Ethan felt it immediately. The shift from a normal afternoon pickup into something that suddenly had weight, expectation, and attention all wrapped into one small sentence. He cleared his throat, instinctively stepping half in front of Lily like he could shield the moment or at least soften it. "She's 6, he said quickly, offering Claire an apologetic look, his voice low but steady. "She says things without a filter." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true, because Lily didn't say everything she thought, only the things that felt certain to her. Claire didn't respond right away, her gaze flicking briefly to Lily, then back to Ethan, and there was no awkwardness in her expression, no discomfort, just a quiet kind of curiosity, like she was trying to understand the context instead of dismissing it. "It's okay," she said gently, her tone calm. "Kids usually pick up on things we ignore." The words landed differently than he expected, not defensive, not dismissive, just honest, and that made it harder to brush off. Jake tugged lightly at Claire's hand, asking something about going home, and she nodded, but her attention lingered for a second longer, like she wasn't quite ready to walk away yet. "I'm Claire, by the way," she added, shifting the moment into something more grounded, more normal. Ethan hesitated just a fraction, then nodded. "Ethan," he replied, adjusting his grip on Lily's backpack strap like he needed something to anchor him. There was a pause again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was open, like both of them were aware they had crossed past being strangers, even if they didn't know what came next. You handled that well, Claire said, glancing briefly at Jake, then back at Ethan, referring to what had just happened in the street. Ethan shrugged slightly. Just instinct, he said, though his voice softened a bit, because the gratitude in hers didn't feel like something to deflect completely. Claire nodded, then let out a small breath, her posture relaxing just enough to reveal something underneath the calm exterior. It's been a lot lately, she admitted, almost like she hadn't planned to. Say it out loud. New school, new routine. I promised my sister I'd help him adjust, but some days I feel like I'm barely keeping up. That was the moment, the shift, the crack in the surface where things stopped being casual and started being real, and Ethan felt it immediately, not because of what she said, but because of how familiar it sounded. He looked at her differently then, not as the woman Lily had pointed at, not as a stranger from the parking lot, but as someone carrying something heavy in a quiet way, just like he was. Yeah, he said after a second, his voice lower now, more honest than before. I get that. Claire met his eyes again, and this time, there was recognition in it, not of each other specifically, but of the shared weight behind simple words. Lily shifted beside him, her small hand slipping into his, and he felt her squeeze lightly, like she was reminding him she was still there, still watching. We should probably get going, Claire said gently after a moment, glancing down at Jake. But her tone held a slight hesitation, like she wasn't closing the door completely. Ethan nodded. Yeah, same here. But neither of them moved right away, and in that small pause, something unspoken settled between them. Not a promise, not even an intention, just a quiet awareness that this wasn't just coincidence anymore. Finally, Claire gave a small, polite smile and turned, guiding Jake toward her car, and Ethan watched for a second longer than necessary before looking down at Lily. All right, let's go, he said, but his voice carried something different now, something less closed than it had been that morning. As they walked back to the truck, Lily looked up at him, her expression calm but certain. See, she said softly. Ethan opened the passenger door for her, exhaling slowly as he helped her climb in. See what? He asked, though he already knew. Lily buckled herself in, then looked at him like it was the simplest truth in the world. She's not a stranger, she said. Ethan paused, his hand resting on the door for just a second longer before closing it gently, because for the first time since all of this started, he wasn't sure he could argue with her. That night, the house felt smaller than usual, like the walls had quietly moved. In just enough to make the silence heavier, and Ethan noticed at the moment he shut the front door behind them. The familiar creak echoing longer than it should have as Lily kicked off her shoes and padded toward the living room, her energy finally slowing after a long day. He set her backpack down, moved through the motions of starting dinner, pulling out a pan, turning on the stove, checking the fridge. But his mind wasn't following the routine the way it normally did, because something had shifted, and he couldn't put it back where it had been. Can we have pancakes for dinner? Lily called from the couch, her voice soft but hopeful, breaking through his thoughts. Ethan glanced over, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite everything. Pancakes are not dinner, he said automatically, but his tone lacked its usual firmness. They could be, she replied, peeking over the back of the couch, and for a second, he almost gave in, almost let things stay simple. But then his phone buzzed again on the counter, and that small sound pulled him right back into the space he had been trying to avoid all evening. He looked at it, already knowing who it might be, and sure enough, Claire's name lit up the screen. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again. Jake won't stop talking about you. Ethan stared at the message, his chest tightening in a way that didn't feel comfortable, not because of her, but because of what it meant, what it could become if he let it. Lily watched him from the couch now, quieter, more observant, like she could feel the tension even if she didn't fully understand it. He picked up the phone, typed a quick response, no problem. He's a good kid. Then hesitated, his thumb hovering as if there was something else he should say, something more honest, but instead, he locked the screen and set it back down harder than necessary. The pan on the stove began to sizzle, the smell of butter filling the kitchen, grounding him just enough to keep moving, to keep doing instead of thinking. Dinner in 10, he called out, but his voice sounded distant, even to himself. A few minutes later, as he flipped the food absent-mindedly, Lily walked into the kitchen, her small footsteps slow, cautious, like she was approaching something fragile. "Dad," she said quietly, and when he didn't respond right away, she stepped closer, tugging lightly on his sleeve. "Are you okay?" The question hit harder than anything else had that day, because it wasn't curious, it was concerned, and that was something he had spent years trying to prevent her from feeling. "I'm fine," he said quickly, too quickly, turning back to the stove, but Lily didn't move away this time. "You said that this morning," she replied softly, her voice steady in a way that didn't match her age, "but you're still not laughing." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, his grip tightening slightly on the spatula, because there it was again. The truth, simple and unavoidable, coming from the one person he couldn't brush off. "Lily," he started, but the words got stuck somewhere between what he wanted to say and what he was willing to admit. She stepped around him then, moving into his line of sight, forcing him to look at her, and her expression wasn't upset or dramatic. It was just honest. "Are you scared?" she asked. The kitchen fell quiet except for the low hiss of the stove, and for the first time all day, Ethan didn't have an immediate answer, because the question went deeper than he expected, deeper than he had allowed himself to go. He turned off the burner slowly, setting the spatula down as the silence stretched just a little longer, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, rougher around the edges. "Yeah," he admitted, almost under his breath, like saying it out loud made it more real. Lily didn't react with surprise or confusion. She just nodded, like she had already known. "Of what?" she asked gently. Ethan let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face, the weight of the last few years pressing in all at once. The loss, the responsibility, the fear of messing things up again, of letting someone in and losing them, of not being enough for both his daughter and anyone else. Of things changing, he said finally, the words imperfect but true. Lily stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him in a quiet hug that caught him off guard, her small voice muffled against his shirt. "Things already changed," she whispered. And that was it. That was the moment something in him cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that he couldn't pretend everything was still. The same, because she was right, and standing there in the middle of his kitchen, holding on to the one person he had been trying to stay strong for, Ethan realized that maybe the hardest part wasn't what he might lose. It was what he might never allow himself to have. The next morning didn't feel like a normal morning, even before Ethan fully opened his eyes, because something from the night before hadn't settled. It had followed him into his sleep and stayed there, quiet but persistent, like a decision waiting to be made whether he was ready or not. He lay still for a second, staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint sound of Lily moving in her room down the hall, and for once, he didn't jump straight into routine. Instead, he let himself feel it. The fear, the hesitation, the possibility, and it sat heavy in his chest until he finally pushed himself up, running a hand over his face like he could clear it away. "Okay," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to yet. The morning moved faster than usual after that, almost like time was nudging him forward. Lily got dressed quicker, breakfast was rushed, and by the time they were back in the truck, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken. Halfway to school, Lily leaned forward again from the back seat, her voice softer this time. "Are you still scared?" Ethan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her small face steady, waiting. He hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "Yeah," he admitted, more honest now, "but I think that's okay." Lily nodded like that made perfect sense, then sat back without another word. And somehow, that quiet acceptance gave him more courage than anything else could have. When they pulled into the school parking lot, Ethan noticed immediately, Claire's blue SUV wasn't there. Something in his chest dropped before he could stop it, a small but sharp disappointment that surprised him with how fast it came. "Maybe she's late," Lily said, as if reading his thoughts, and Ethan forced a small nod. "Maybe," he echoed, though his eyes kept scanning the lot longer than necessary. He parked, helped Lily out, and walked her toward the entrance, but the absence lingered, turning something that had felt possible into something uncertain again. Inside, he crouched down like always, adjusting her backpack, grounding himself in the familiar. "Have a good day," he said, brushing her hair back gently. Lily studied his face for a second, then smiled. A small, knowing smile that felt older than she was. "Don't wait too long," she said quietly, then turned and walked down the hall, leaving him standing there with words he didn't fully understand until he stepped back outside. The parking lot felt emptier now, colder, and for a moment, Ethan just stood there, keys in hand, staring at the spot where Claire's car had been the day before, the weight of indecision pressing in again. But this time, it didn't feel like something he could ignore. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket, sharp and unexpected, and he pulled it out quickly, his heart already beating faster before he even saw the screen. It was a message from Claire. "Hey, I'm so sorry. Jake woke up sick this morning. I had to keep him home. I hope Lily has a good day." Ethan read it once, then again, relief and something else, something warmer, moving through him all at once, because she hadn't disappeared. She hadn't stepped out of whatever this was becoming. She was still there. Without thinking too long, he typed back, "No worries. Hope he's okay." He paused, then added, "If you need anything, I'm around." He stared at the message for a second, feeling the weight of it, because this wasn't just polite anymore, it was a step. And then he hit send before he could pull back. The reply came quicker than he expected. "That actually means a lot. It's been a rough morning." Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip tightening slightly on the phone, because now the moment wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was real, happening, moving forward whether he was fully ready or not. He looked up, scanning the quiet parking lot one more time, then made a decision, not a big, dramatic one, but one that mattered. He turned back toward his truck, already pulling his keys up, but instead of getting in right away, he stopped, his thumb hovering over his phone again as he opened a new message. "Do you want me to drop by after work? I could bring some soup or something for Jake." He read it once, his heart pounding harder than it should for something so simple, because this wasn't just about helping anymore. It was about stepping into something he had been avoiding for years. And as he stood there in the cold morning air, waiting for her response, Ethan realized this was it. Not the final moment, not the big one his daughter seemed to believe in, but the one right before it, the moment where he either stepped forward or stayed exactly where he had been. By the time Ethan pulled up in front of Claire's house that evening, the sun had already started to dip low, casting that soft golden light that made everything feel quieter, slower, like the world itself was holding its breath, and his hand stayed on the steering wheel for a second longer than necessary because this felt bigger than just dropping off soup. Lily sat beside him in the passenger seat, her legs swinging slightly, watching him with that same calm certainty she had carried through everything. "You're doing it," she said softly, not as a question, but as a fact. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, nodding once. "Yeah, I think I am." He reached for the bag on the seat, stepping out into the cool air, each step toward the front door feeling heavier and lighter at the same time, like he was walking into something he couldn't take back, but maybe didn't want it anymore. He knocked, the sound echoing gently, and a few seconds later, the door opened. Claire stood there, her hair loosely tied back, her expression tired but soft, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because this wasn't a parking lot or a passing moment anymore. This was intentional. "Hey," she said quietly, a small, surprised smile forming when she saw him, and then Lily stepping up beside him. "We brought soup," Lily added quickly, holding the bag up like it was the most important thing in the world. Claire let out a soft laugh, stepping aside. "You didn't have to do that, but thank you really." Inside, the house was warm, lived in but slightly unsettled, like they were still adjusting, and Jake sat curled up on the couch under a blanket, giving Ethan a small wave when he saw him. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said, setting the bag down on the counter, something about the normalcy of the moment easing the tension just enough to let conversation flow. Simple at first, careful, but real. Time passed without him noticing, talking, checking on Jake. Lily quietly playing nearby, and at some point, the distance that had been there between him and Claire just wasn't anymore. Later, as the kids settled into the living room, their voices soft in the background, Ethan found himself standing with Claire near the kitchen, the light dimmer now, the space quieter, and that same feeling returned, the one from the beginning, but clearer this time. "I almost didn't come," he admitted, his voice low, honest in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be before. Claire looked at him, not surprised, just understanding. "I figured," she said gently. He let out a small breath, shaking his head slightly. "I've spent a long time Not letting things change, he continued, his eyes dropping briefly before meeting hers again, steadier now. But my daughter, she doesn't see it that way. Claire smiled faintly, glancing toward the living room where Lily's quiet laughter drifted in. She seems pretty sure about things, she said. Ethan nodded, a soft, almost disbelieving smile forming. Yes, she is. There was a pause then, longer this time, heavier, because now it wasn't about small talk or safe ground anymore. It was about the thing both of them could feel but hadn't named yet. Ethan's hand shifted slightly at his side, his breath catching just enough to betray the control he had held onto for so long. And then, it broke. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but honestly. I don't know how to do this right, he said, his voice rough, vulnerable in a way that felt almost foreign. But I know I don't want to keep pretending this doesn't matter. Claire didn't interrupt, didn't step back. She just stayed there, letting him say it. From the living room, Lily suddenly appeared at the edge of the hallway, watching them, quiet but present, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. Ethan noticed her, his breath catching again, and something inside him shifted completely. Not fear disappearing, but something stronger taking its place. He took a small step forward, his voice unsteady but clear. Claire, I don't know where this goes, he said, his eyes not leaving hers, but I want to try with you. The room seemed to still, not frozen in shock, but in something deeper, something real, something felt, and for a second, no one moved. Then Claire's expression softened in a way that said everything before she even spoke. I'd like that, she replied quietly. Behind him, Lily let out a small, satisfied breath, like something had finally clicked into place, and Ethan glanced back at her, a real smile breaking through for the first time in a long time. Not forced, not careful, just real. And in that moment, nothing dramatic happened. No perfect ending, no instant answers, but something far more important did. He stopped standing still. Sometimes, the biggest moments don't look like what we expect. They're not always loud or perfect, but they change everything anyway. So what about you? Have you ever almost missed something real because you were too afraid to take the first step? If this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for more stories that feel just like life itself.